Ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to be here to open the European Cluster Conference 2014.
As Europe slowly recovers from the crisis, clusters show their potential for growth. Today they account for about 38% of European jobs. Encouraged by these results, policymakers, cluster managers and academics have gathered in Brussels for the 4th European Cluster Conference. The objective? To discuss the latest trends and identify priority areas for a new European cluster strategy for growth.
This conference marks the beginning of a process that will review and reflect on the changing role of clusters in today's globalized economy.
Our common objective is to develop a strong European policy framework for clusters, a framework that will also help you refine your policies and instruments to ensure that clusters play a strategic role in Europe's future, boosting SME growth, industrial renewal and structural change.
We have big issues with our energy suppliers. We must develop new forms of energy. We have big issues with resources. And a lot of new issues are facing the European societies. And therefore we also need new businesses and new ways of cooperating.
Whether it be in emerging industries or traditional ones, policymakers highlight the importance of tracking possible cross-industry linkages.
To create new solutions, we have to connect different knowledges from different branches, different companies.
You have private business, you have public sector, and you have the universities. And when you bring these three parts of society together, often you can create value because each of them brings something to the table that the other parts didn't have.
What makes clusters so important today is their capacity to collaborate, innovate and create jobs. The conference examined how cluster policies can be adapted to support regional growth even more effectively.
We have to reinforce the association of clusters, giving them enough money, enough financing systems and empowering them in all the policies, regional policies, European policies, and putting them into the market in all over the world.
There are, for example, a lot of EU programs or initiatives that need to be integrated into national policies, and in order not to have isolated efforts, and so to maximize the likelihood of having a direct impact to clusters, to the SMEs and to the whole economic environment.
Giving the floor to people with hands-on experience was one of the main objectives of the conference. Stan Higgins, whose cluster counts up to 35,000 employees, was awarded Cluster Manager of the Year. He provides us with some insight on the skills a cluster manager needs when striving for cluster excellence.
I honestly think that in managing the cluster in industry, you have to be really good at forcing yourself to measure things. We have been strong on measuring what we do and showing people what we can do, and that has attracted more members because we've got all the data to prove that we're effective.
For 2 days, participants were engaged in jointly identifying novel approaches to shape strategic priorities for future cluster policy actions.
They proposed a topic that felt close to the heart, and the other participant chose which one they wanted to discuss. And it's at the end they developed a further idea that perhaps we can pick up at European level.
In this session we're talking about identifying more effective gateways into academia.
The topic of the discussion today is to know what kind of public support civil servants can give.
How cluster managers could drive better long-term internationalisation programmes with funding from the Commission and access to better resources everywhere.
After hours of intensive discussions, the statements resulting from this participatory approach were put to the vote and included in the 2014 Cluster Conference Declaration. This document, in turn, will lay the foundations for a new European cluster strategy for growth that will be adopted in 2015.
We must always look at new ways of doing things. So the old way of preparing a policy statement by getting people to sit down around a table and discuss things for hours and hours and hours, well, that's one way of doing it. Let's try something else and see how effective it is.
For all participants and speakers, the European Cluster Conference has certainly been worthwhile. The results achieved will be taken on board and will provide a springboard for the next generation of clusters in Europe.